Our next guest is somebody I've been looking forward to speaking to, much like a child looks forward to Christmas morning. He is the founder of a company whose showroom is just across the street. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Martin Eberhard, the founder of Tesla. Thank you. Welcome. Thank you for making the trek all the way out here despite the Air Berlin difficulties.
Thank you.
Wow. So I want to start the conversation a little bit with where you started your entrepreneurial endeavors. So we know a lot of things. Tesla is one of the big names in there. You're involved in some new things now. Can you tell us where this all started?
Well, I guess I consider myself to be an engineer at heart. And when I graduated from university, I took a job with a company in Silicon Valley that I liked the feeling of the company. It's hard to imagine in today's world, but in those days, I didn't know what a startup company was. I didn't know what stock was. I had no idea. But I liked the feeling of it, and I came to realize that what I liked the feeling of was the feeling of the energy in a startup company. So from there, I worked at this company for a few years and then branched out to start my own company after that.
Mm-hmm. What was the first company that you ended up starting?
It was a company called Network Computing Devices. We made high-performance graphics terminals in those days. Mm-hmm. And that company went public in, I guess, 1991.
So the height of the silicon graphics and the whole...
that's right.
Wow, that's good. And after that, you did... So I read up on this. You did Nova Media. You started the ebooks, in essence.
Well, that's right. My first company, Nova Media, Network Computing Devices, we were making something that was, from my perspective, technically very interesting. It was inside a neat bit of graphics hardware and so on. But when I described that to anybody that's outside the industry, it was just really boring. And so for my next startup company, I wanted to do something that was outright interesting. And that got me to think about books and thinking about what we can do bringing some technology to the book space. And so that's the idea behind Nova Media and the Rocket Book was for me to do something that was not just technically interesting, but was interesting in a bigger way.
Were you, when you brought this to market, were you surprised by the reactions? Did you think this is going to be a lot bigger than you first thought? Like, do you think everybody's going to replace paper with ebooks? Or do you think, should this be an ebook right now? Or, I mean, how did you envision this when you first...
No, I mean, I love books. If you come to my house, it's full of books. It's not an either-or kind of thing. Electronic books are and were an augmentation of the paper books we might have. The argument I made was that when you travel, for example, in one electronic book, you could bring 100 books, no problem. You can apply technology to the book you're reading. So if you're reading in a language that's not your first language, the book can translate for you or have a dictionary built in to look up words, that kind of thing.
Which is a good thing, especially with baggage weight restrictions, right? I mean, the 100 books you would have had to take on your flight here would have been a solid overbaggage.
And in a world where fewer and fewer people are reading, I mean, we've come into a world of not illiteracy, but illiteracy, where people don't read books much anymore. Anything we can do to encourage people to read more is good.
Which is a good start behind that. Now, I kind of want to jump into the question. I'm kind of dying to ask this question. So, how did you get the idea for Tesla? I mean, sorry, I hold back here, but I got to jump a few questions ahead here. How did you get the idea to start Tesla?
There's a couple pieces to that. So one piece of this is that with Nova Media and the Rocket Book, I wanted to do something that's interesting, and my goal for my next company was to do something that was actually useful and good. So that was kind of the background of it. But there's a little bit of the backstory on Tesla is. Somewhere around the year 2000, I got divorced, and as any sensible American guy does when he gets divorced, I was going to go buy a new sports car, right? and this is at the time when...
Spending a lot of time at the Corvette dealerships, I take it.
Porsche dealers.
Porsche dealer, okay.
And it was unfortunately at the time when, on the one hand, it was clear to me that the wars in the Middle East at least had something to do with oil, and it was also at a time for me when the idea of global warming was becoming harder and harder to ignore. And in the end, I finally couldn't bring myself to go buy a car that got 18 or 20 miles to the gallon. It was just not acceptable. And so I started thinking about, there's got to be a better way. And that was the beginning of it. And my original quest was just to find a car for myself. My now wife tells me that most guys, when they reach that age and they have their midlife crisis, they go buy an expensive sports car, and I start a sports car company.
That's the engineering approach, right?
Maybe so, yeah.
Very good. So actually, out of curiosity, what car would you have bought if you had not started Tesla?
Oh, maybe a Porsche Boxster, something like that, yeah.
That is an excellent choice. And one thing I want to talk about is the drivetrain behind this, right? So, I mean, Tesla is a car company that was focused very much so on beyond gasoline, right up on this. But you actually went through all kinds of propulsion systems,
Right.
so wheel-to-well sort of power calculations to see what is actually the best approach.
Right.
Can you tell us a little
I
about?
didn't originally start off as a electric car enthusiast. I was a no more fossil fuel enthusiast, and so my approach was to look at every possible way of powering a car I could think of, and look at what is the amount of energy that comes out of the ground in the terms of natural gas or coal or oil, and then what is the energy efficiency of converting that into whatever fuel goes in the car, and then how far does the car go per mile on that fuel, and calculate from end to end. You can calculate what is the well-to-wheel efficiency of that kind of drivetrain. And this is at a time when all of the car companies around the world had given up on electric cars and were all putting their energies behind hydrogen fuel cells. And I was really surprised to see that if you just do the math, hydrogen fuel cells make no sense, and they never will. It's a crazy idea. And I was surprised to see that the electric car drivetrain was by far the most efficient of all these choices. And to me, I looked at that and I said, on the one hand, my engineering analysis says that this is by far the best choice, and everybody who ought to be my competitor, all of the car companies here in Europe, in Japan, in the United States, had recently abandoned the space, and we were going in and tilting at the windmill of hydrogen fuel cells. And I said, this is a perfect opportunity for a startup company, even as it is insane to try to start a car company.
And when you first saw this, we're like, somebody else has got to be doing this, right? I mean, that's one of the first things people always say, I'm sure somebody's working on this. But literally no one was really pursuing that technology.
They had actually given up on it. In the United States, there's a famous movie about it, that the best electric car that had been made was a General Motors EV1. And General Motors had actually recalled the leases of those things, and in some cases with physical force, took the cars back from the customers and crushed them. All of them. There are none of those cars on the road anymore.
Wow, that is customer service right there.
That's right.
If they only did that for maintenance issues,
The publicity nightmare behind that, you just got to think, what were those guys thinking? I don't know.
Any publicity is good publicity. That's probably my bet on that.
Yeah. No, I know actually what they're thinking, that if you think about a company like General Motors, in those days, they were selling their large SUVs like crazy, and they were making approximately $14,000 of profit per car they were selling. And you picture yourself in the mind of a board member of that company whose fiduciary responsibility is to return as much of a profit as possible to shareholders. How can they promote a different technology that suggests that maybe their customers shouldn't buy that super profitable SUV? This is the problem they have. And this is the problem that every car company faces.
And you with Tesla, you went after the BMW drivers of Palo Alto. I was watching your speech at Stanford, and I was laughing very hard because I grew up in Palo Alto, and it's definitely true. It's Porsche, BMW in every driveway next to a Prius, right?
That was right. When I was trying, I spent some time looking at many other car companies, particularly startup companies in the past who had tried to make electric cars. And many of those, all of those car companies had tried to make something that was affordable to everybody as their first car. Okay, so what they wound up with was a fiberglass body on a golf cart. It was something that nobody wanted to drive. It was ridiculous. And the reason it was made the best intentions that they need to, if this technology is the future, they need to make it affordable for everybody. But I thought, what new technology comes along and tries to enter a market at the bottom of the price curve? I mean, smartphones didn't, televisions didn't, air conditioners, refrigerators, every new technology that comes along starts off expensive, learns how to make it, builds a desire for the product, and works its way down market as they learn how to build the product cost effectively and as they achieve economies of scale. So I looked at that and said, okay, if I'm not going to compete on price for an electric car, then what is the right thing to compete on? And as an engineer, I look at that kind of drivetrain and say, if you do it right, that car should go fast. That should be a great car.
Skyline.
So let's build a car that's a performance car. And so that was the genesis of Tesla being different than everybody else. Once I had gotten over the idea of trying to make a low-cost car, that then opened the opportunity to use different technologies that had ever been used in a car before. So, for example, lithium-ion batteries had not been used in cars before, and they were by far better batteries. They were at the time more expensive. Motors, most people use very simple motor technology in their cars. I chose to use the AC induction motor, which is invented by, guess who? Nikola Tesla. So this is why it's called Tesla. The AC induction motor is a better motor for the application, but it's more expensive to develop the drivetrain for that.
Was there ever a competitor called Edison?
Yeah, there have been people who played with that, but Edison was a very different character.
A very different character. And so you stayed in the battery tech sphere, right? That is what you're currently still involved in?
Well, that's right. After I left Tesla and after my legal issues were solved with those guys, I actually spent a couple of years working for Volkswagen, working on battery technology for some prototype cars they did. And I had some disagreements about whether they should be pursuing electric drivetrains as their path toward the future or diesel. I kind of think today that my opinion has borne itself out with Volkswagen.
Diesel, huh? Volkswagen, yeah.
Yeah. I told one of the upper managers at Diesel, he explained that at Volkswagen, he explained that their plan for meeting their emissions and corporate average fuel economy requirements was clean diesel. And I said, to me, clean diesel is an oxymoron. Yeah,
I'm sure he agrees with you at this point.
Yeah.
I think that has happened.
Well, when I left Volkswagen and I'm watching what's going on in this space, I saw the disaster created by the Dieselgate thing and its ripple effect through all the rest of the German car companies. I saw this as an opportunity. I saw that maybe these kind of companies will begin to see a different future than just internal combustion engines, and that was the genesis of my new startup company, which I can't talk a lot about yet, but it's about what's the right way to build to structure an electric car, and what's the right way to put the energy storage into the car.
And we were talking about the future. Actually, Volkswagen just announced they're investing $84 billion in electric cars on Monday, right? $50 billion of which is supposed to go into battery technology.
Well, announcements are cheap. I'll believe it when they actually do.
That's true. That's true. We're talking about the future, right? So we'll see if it's.
Yeah, I mean, they've made lots of announcements in the past, as have all the other car companies, and whether they actually come to be true, we'll see. I hope so.
Yeah. Speaking of announcements, one of the other things that's kind of developing around the world is sort of this trend to ban combustion engines outright in the future. So we have some announcements like Britain by 2040, I think France as well.
I think France was the first to make, the first was probably Norway with 2025. And then France made an announcement. My suspicion is that was somehow coupled with discussions with some of the French car companies that are investing in electric cars anyway. And England never wants to be outdone by the French, so they came back and said the same thing, 2040. And then Germany, maybe in response to that, as well as the Dieselgate scandal, is now saying 2030. So, and China, of course, made a big announcement recently. I don't remember exactly what year they said, but they said very soon that they want to push for banning internal combustion engines. And in America, we say global warming is a Chinese hoax and we should buy an SUV.
Absolutely. But, they do make the Cadillac as a hybrid, the Escalade. That's 19 miles per gallon instead of 17. That's a big step forward. I want to shift gears here, no pun intended there, for mobility as a whole and talk a little bit about what's happening with Uber, self-driving cars, and just new ideas for public transport. Mm-hmm. How do you see technology changing mobility? I mean, you saw it a lot with the lithium-ion battery and electric cars. How do you see the concept of not owning a car anymore? For example, like an Uber concept or new drivetrains like Hyperloop in terms of transportation concepts?
There's a lot packed into that question.
There is a lot packed into that question.
So a couple things. So the idea that we aren't going to own cars anymore, I'll believe it when I see it. I'm a child of the 60s in Berkeley, and I remember very much in Berkeley in those days that we weren't going to own cars. We would have, our commune would each own its own microbus, and we would share that. And those same people who said that today drive Mercedes. So the peace sign just lost that middle leg, and now it's a Mercedes symbol.
Brand ambassadors, yeah.
So I'm not too sure whether that's true or not. Maybe so, but as we look at our overcrowded cities and the traffic problems we have, it's not clear to me that changing who owns the car or changing the drivetrain of the car or changing whether somebody turns the steering wheel or not is going to solve that problem. I'm not convinced that cars are the right answer for these crowded places at all. We should maybe broaden the question and look at what is the right way to move people around anyways. And is it on the road? Is it underground in subways? Is it some other way?
Mm-hmm. And as a contrast, we have a great public transportation system here in
It's
Switzerland.
a total delight, yeah.
Yeah, we were geeking out about the Gotthard base tunnel, right?
When I come to Switzerland, I would never dream of renting a car. It would be nuts. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, good luck parking, right? I mean, it's
and the trains work so well. Yeah.
And then compare that with Silicon Valley, for example, which has no public transit, basically, right?
Well, of course, Silicon Valley is much more spread out. I mean, Switzerland is a fairly small, compact country compared to
True. The vast plains of the Silicon Valley.
and all of California.
Yeah. The next question that I have is kind of related to self-driving cars. I mean, that's a topic that's become very, very hot, and a lot of people talk about. Where do you see self-driving cars kind of going?
Well, it feels a little bit like a bubble, doesn't it? Yeah.
Feels like it.
Maybe, yeah. So I have some enthusiasm and some concerns about self-driving cars. Today, the efforts toward developing the technology of self-driving cars have led to great advancements in sensors and into the logic that looks at the sensors. And that's led to some very important advanced driver assist systems, which I think are good. I've seen some, obviously the lane departure warnings, the intelligent cruise control, following technologies, the drowsiness detection. These kind of things are for sure life-saving technologies. But on the other side of the coin, we actually don't know how to write software that is provably correct. We don't know how to write software that we can guarantee doesn't do the wrong thing. And it's one thing if our computer or our cell phone crashes, then it's annoying and then it reboots and life is good. But when your car crashes, people die. And I think that we haven't really internalized that yet. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I read an interesting article in Auto News, it's an Auto Industry Insider magazine, written by the head of the autonomous group at Daimler. And he was pretty straightforward. He says that the technology to make a car fully self-driving is going to be expensive for some time. And the only place where you can make a business case for this is when you're replacing a driver, like a taxi driver. So he predicts that taxi drivers will be replaced soon by fully autonomous taxis in the cities. And that's great and wonderful, and the taxi companies will save themselves a lot of money by not paying those pesky drivers. But we have to eventually start to ask ourselves, what are we going to do with the people who were driving cars and buses and trucks? What are we going to do with those people? Again, I'm not as familiar with Europe, but in the US, truck driving is the only real remaining occupation where somebody without a college degree can still have a real middle-class living. And what are we going to do with all those people when they lose their jobs? So I kind of worry about that.
It's a big question. Actually, I looked up the numbers on this. There's 1.8 million truck drivers in the United States. It's actually one of the largest job categories. 1 in 5 jobs in transportation. It seemed a little low, but that actually includes everything. So including flight mechanics, people that produce, work at Boeing to a large degree. And that's a very large category of jobs that are going to fall away. And in many ways, it's structural unemployment because these are people that need to be retrained completely.
Right. But the other side of the coin, of course, is that trucks are by far disproportionately responsible for accidents, deadly accidents on the highway. There's both sides of the coin that making the trucks on the road safer is a good idea. Maybe even getting the trucks off the road and moving the freight as much as we can on rail would be even better. But we have to think about the social implications of these things, and that's not just for driving, but in general as we start having AI replacing jobs. What are we going to do with the people whose jobs have been replaced?
Which kind of links to what Andrew Keen said at the beginning, right?
That's
I mean, the question remains: are we all going to just have fun, or I think a structured workday does bring some purpose to life, right? I guess that's a question that's going to come up pretty quickly.
That's right, and I think that we can't just train everybody to be artists and poets and the things that machines can't do. I think that we can't have a art and poetry oriented society. I'm not sure if that's the answer.
I think that, I'd be curious to see what that looks like. We have white walls, so you can start writing, practicing. Please don't. They told me not to say that, but I just couldn't resist. So one of the things actually in terms of public transit and kind of the link between autonomous and public transit, so Switzerland actually just today announced the Post that their self-driving buses that they've been testing, that they want to bring that to more cities as a way to kind of get through and around like that. In terms of places you could put a bus that are currently economically not feasible, is something that I would love to see, and also see the urbanization, right? I mean, if you have a bus route, you need to have a certain number of riders on that route. Otherwise, you can't run that. Yeah. And with the combination of electric and autonomous, you can kind of take away a lot of the cost factors, and you can start to live in a little bit more of a distributed way. Do you see that as a way to go forward in the United States in many ways? Or do you think that the question is more related to, should we actually just fundamentally think of a different transportation system? Well,
right. I think that the transportation system that makes sense in a compact European city is going to be different than in a typical sprawling American city. If you think about what it would take to do that in Los Angeles, for example, with just acres and acres and acres of houses, I'm not sure how that works. But I think that we need to be thinking in a bigger way about what is the right mode of transportation for people. And I think that the answer is not necessarily going to be the same in one place as it is in another.
What are some of the more interesting examples or forms that you've heard of people coming up with? I mean, we know the Hyperloop. That's one that a lot of people talk about.
Hyperloop is just another kind of train, right? It's just they changed the rails to something else.
And it's got a cool name, right?
Whatever, yeah. Yeah, maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not, I don't know. I can think of a lot of ways that could go wrong. Who knows? We'll let it play out. But
deceleration.
I heard one suggestion that I thought was really interesting, that if you think about, again, particularly in these older European cities, if you think about the subway systems under London, under Paris, and so on, they're actually marvels. I mean, these are over 100 years old, and they work pretty darn well, more or less in the mode they had been designed 100 years ago. Imagine if we use that infrastructure and do something different, that instead of having this long train that goes from here to here on a schedule, instead we have 2 or 4 or 6 person pods that are directed by a fairly smart computer system, where I just take my iPhone and I say I want to go here, and it says go to gate 2. I go in, I get in that pod, and it takes me directly to my destination. I mean, using that infrastructure instead of the road infrastructure as we think about new ways of transportation seems to me a great opportunity.
In terms of who's responsible for driving that progress, right? I mean, that's one of the big questions we also heard in there. Car companies are probably going to drive autonomous cars forward pretty quickly, as are companies like Uber, because they have a strong economic incentive to do so. But public transit is generally driven forward by the public and the demand for better transportation services. Do you see a trend emerging, or would you like to see a trend emerging in certain areas that kind of push forward for more of that versus the autonomous side? Because, I mean, one example that I want to bring up is, the Caltrain, right? It's really a piece of aerodynamic wonder because it's a brick. It's a brick that moves on a train. They just bought Swiss Trains, finally. And I'm curious to see, how slowly this has kind of progressed. And I have not seen, for LA, for example, has no public transit. I couldn't even find a bus there. So do you see cities
Gold
like...
Line. I mean, it's
not the Gold, okay.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit. Enough to say they have one. But do you see some good trends emerging there that...
You know the history of LA's public transit. They had a subway system.
Really?
Yes.
I did not know.
In the 1950s, it was purchased by a consortium of one of the big tire companies, one of the big car companies, one of the big oil companies. And they
wow.
Closed it. This is true. Yeah. And they closed it. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
I wonder what the board... we should buy a subway.
Well, there was a court case about this, and they were actually found guilty of this, and they were fined something like $500 each.
Wow, that's a steep fine. Yeah. I'm sure they...
Yeah. So, the thing is that the vested interests in that space were pretty clearly doing what they needed to do for themselves. Yeah.
Which is exactly the question on the regulatory side. I mean, the government has to kind of push these projects.
So again, backing up to looking at my career, especially when I got into first the electronic book space and then got into cars, to me as an entrepreneur, what I found to be the most interesting was taking the Silicon Valley entrepreneur ideas and the technology we knew and applying it to other fields. So applying it to the publishing industry, applying it to the automotive industry. Maybe there are entrepreneurs who are thinking about applying the same spirit to the public transit space. I think it's a great opportunity.
And that's true. That's true, especially in LA with the traffic.
I think everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, in that sort of sense. I want to take some questions from the audience at this point as well. So I think the mic is actually backstage, so if you could bring that out. I want to give you guys all a chance to ask the questions. It's not. Okay. In that case, can we bring a mic from upstairs down quickly? Oh, actually, there we go. We're already ahead of ourselves. Sorry, we found the mic. Do you have a question to start it off with? Not yet. Okay. Question in the back. Could you pass him the cube? Yeah. Thank you.
Talking about the Hyperloop that you mentioned before, this is something that is, as of right now, really hyped, the idea behind it, because Elon Musk told that was a good idea. But can't you compare that to the Transrapid that Siemens invested like billions of dollars into it and it never took off? I mean, that's kind of comparable, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Hyperloop might have one extra R in the name, right? Yeah. It might be Hypeloop. Yeah, so I mean, again, to me, Hyperloop has seen a lot of press because of some people with lots of microphones can say what they want. But I think that the idea of examining how our rail systems work, and is there something better than the two rails on the ground as invented, over 100 years ago? Maybe there is a better way, and I'm happy to see people investigating other ideas. Not all of those will be successful, so who knows? Yeah, but I agree with you that it's maybe a little bit pumped up. Yeah.
The bubble. Okay, we have a question up front. Ooh, boy.
Oh!
Boy, okay. They told me this is very soft, but I'm starting to doubt that. So I see an opportunity for somebody to do it.
I'll be more careful next throw. You said hydrogen cell cars or hydrogen cells don't make sense and maybe they never will.
Mm-hmm.
Could you elaborate?
Sure. There's two parts to that. The first part is the fuel cell itself, which takes hydrogen and converts it to electricity. In the kind of fuel cells people use, the so-called proton exchange membrane fuel cells, are never going to be more efficient than about 25% efficiency. And that's in the nature of the way the fuel cell works. One could imagine inventing a different kind of fuel cell, like a solid oxide fuel cell with better efficiency. But then there's the other half, which is where does the hydrogen come from? Unfortunately, there isn't any free hydrogen on Earth. You have to make it. Okay, so what you do is you take typically water and put in energy and do electrolysis and produce a hydrogen. Now you can look at the system, and I say on the one side, I put in energy, electricity, and I produce hydrogen, and then I compress it, and then I put it into a car, and then I put it through a fuel cell, and I get electricity back out again. I can look at now the electricity I put in versus coming out. What is my efficiency? Today, that's something like 15 to 20%. Maybe one day we'll get to 25% efficiency through the whole system. That's the best you can hope for. To compare that, today's lithium-ion batteries, including charging system and everything involved, are way better than 80% efficient. Maybe 85, maybe 90% efficient. There's no way it can compete. It just does, the part that people ignore about fuel cell cars is where does the hydrogen come from? Yeah.
And a lot of people actually ask also about lithium, right? Lithium scarcity. What's your opinion on lithium scarcity?
Do you know what the atomic number is for lithium?
Not by heart.
It's worth knowing.
Just not that one.
It's hydrogen, helium, lithium. It's number 3. It's really common stuff. There's a lot of it around. It's just 3 protons. That's it. It's a very simple stuff. There's a lot of it in the universe. There's some of it happens in South America. There are places on the plains that are just practically pure lithium lying on the ground. You can scoop that up, and it's really cheap. And we'll use that up eventually, and we'll have to work a little harder at it. But one of the big differences between oil and lithium is that when you put petroleum as gasoline or diesel into your car and burn it, it's gone. It's all gone. You have to find more. Lithium doesn't go away. When the battery is expired, the lithium's still there, and it recycles fairly easily. So once we get to the point where we are running our cars, if it is in fact lithium batteries, those batteries will be recycled just as we do today with the lead in our lead acid batteries in the starter motors of our cars.
Go on. Atomic number 3. A question there to the gentleman in the middle.
What do you think are the key ingredients to become a great entrepreneur, successful entrepreneur? And if you think back 20 years from today versus how this might be how this would look like in about 20 years from now, how is this mix of ingredients changing? And if you could put a bit of an emphasis also on the people component.
Lithium, right?
So I mean, to be I can't speak for all entrepreneurs. I can only speak for myself. And I think that there's a lot of ingredients to it. One of them is to have maybe an unreasonable faith in your own ability to solve problems that you haven't yet figured out. For me, especially the kinds of fields I've gone into, I think that at the beginning of stage of an entrepreneurial path, especially if it's something that's difficult, you have to be maybe a little bit naive about how hard it's going to be, right? There was, if I had known really how hard it is to actually start a car company, I might not have done that. So, and I think having the right education in the space you understand is important. But also, like when I interview people, the thing I look for, a characteristic I look for in people is what I would call maybe come up to speedmanship. So, an area you don't know comes in front of you, and you need to solve the problem. How long does it take you to learn that new field and actually become competent at it? One of my friends describes his ability. He says, "I'm 2 weeks to expert. Whatever the new programming language or new technology is, give me 2 weeks and I'll get it." That's what I look for. So I think these kind of things are important. There's probably a lot more than that, but yeah.
Excellent. Do you have any more questions from the audience? Oh, up front.
Good catch.
Hello. Oh, so my question is, have you been one of the instigators of releasing the patents for electric motors? That was my first question. And in retrospect, do you think it was a good business idea to do so? And if so, would you promote that also for softwares, for freely? Would you encourage?
There's a lot packed into that question.
Yeah.
So let me take it a couple bits at a time. So first of all, don't believe everything you read. There are strings attached to that. The electric motor that Tesla used, remember, was invented by Nikola Tesla. The patent expired over 100 years ago, so that one's okay. You can use those. So patents in general are a mixed bag. Patents were originally invented to protect the inventor and give him an opportunity to exploit his new invention and pay for the cost of coming up with the invention. The way patents are often used now is the opposite, that they're used to suppress invention. So in my own experience, every time I've started a company, and that includes Tesla, as we become successful and as we come to the point where maybe we're going to do an IPO or something like that, somebody comes out of the woodwork, some patent troll or some giant corporation comes to us and says, we think you're infringing this patent. And I look at the patent and I'm like, no, we're not. And I say, well, okay, but we have 45,000 patents in our portfolio here and 25 lawyers. How about you? And so you wind up paying a bribe to get out of it. So patents are a problem that need to be resolved in some cases, but they're also, as in my own side, when I have patented my own inventions, I need to have some protection for those. So it's a mixed bag. The Tesla so-called releasing of the patents, I know at a couple of companies that they've looked at what is the fine print involved in that, and so far as I can tell, nobody has taken them up on it because of the strings attached. Mixed feelings, yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead. I was just checking to see if there's any online questions, but that's a little bit harder than it looks. Please go ahead.
Great, I'll just continue there. Quick question. You founded a startup producing electric cars, and then you went on to a legacy car maker, helping them making electric cars. What's the difference, and does it help to be a startup and starting with a clean sheet, or
yes,
does it help to have the big background?
That's a super good question. I decided to take the job at Volkswagen. They came to me. I wasn't looking for a job, but they asked me to come and help them out. And I agreed to do that because I figured eventually I should learn how car companies work, having done one already myself. And it was actually hugely educational to come inside that company. I learned a lot about how these companies work, good and bad. And the difficulty that a legacy car company has is their legacy. So I had, for example, I went out for a couple beers with a guy who was head of some big part of powertrain at this big German car company. And he explained to me, he said, look, I'm now 5 years away from my mandatory retirement age. In 5 years, I will be required to retire from this company. In the next 5 years, I guarantee you that 100% of our profit is going to come from internal combustion engines. So why should I spend even 5 minutes thinking about this new technology? This is the trouble of a big car company. Now, these are the old guys up at the top of the pyramid of the company. When you get down to the bottom and you talk to the engineers who are sitting at the CAD stations and designing the next generation of cars, these guys totally get it. These were some absolutely world-class, superb engineers that see that the future has to be something different than what they're working on right now. So a startup company has the advantage that everybody in the company is working on the same goal. There aren't any little empires inside the company. There aren't any little hidden agendas. We all realize that if we don't get that car, in our case, a Tesla, on the road and shipping, there's nothing else. The company's out of business. It focuses the mind. The second piece is, at a startup company, at least everyone I've ever started, every employee in the company is a shareholder, 100%. Even the receptionist at the front desk owns some stock in the company. And that also focuses everybody to realize that we're all here to try to make that stock worth something. That's not the case at a big car company, ever.
It's a principal agent issue, I guess. If you're only looking for what you can get out of it, that might cause some problems in setting a roadmap that's actually profitable in the long run.
For sure, that's right. When you work at Volkswagen, as an example, is a company that I think they might be bigger than some countries, the total number of employees. And you can't possibly expect everybody in that company to be focused on the same vision. They don't even know what the vision is. They just go to work and do their job. And they try to protect their job and their space and work on their little career and not think about what's the big picture.
They're a little less agile as well, right,
Yeah.
with that huge size. Do we have any other questions from the audience? Unique chance. We got time for about 3 more questions, so you can have some time to think of them. Oh, there you go. Gentleman in the middle. Big throw. No.
Hi. If you would start Tesla again, what would you do differently?
That's such a hard question. Well, I mean, frankly, for my own self personally, I would have written the bylaws to protect myself a little better. But no, I think we did. Hindsight's 2020. There's certain things that we did on the architecture of our first car that we shouldn't have done. As an example, we acquired some technology for the way the charging system would work, and it was a waste of time. But you don't know that until you look at it backwards, from hindsight. But I think that in the big brushstrokes, we got it right. That we created a car that changed everybody in the world's opinion of what an electric car could be, and we did that deliberately. That was the right idea. We looked at the way the automotive franchise laws worked in the United States, and we decided that we were not going to sell franchises to sell our cars, that we would own those ourselves, more like the Apple stores. And again, that was probably the right choice. So maybe we stumbled along the way and could have done that a little more smoothly, but it's kind of the right idea. So I think more or less we hit it pretty well. I mean, I would say the biggest mistakes that I made early on in Tesla were one, understanding how difficult supply chain is in that space. Just trying to get people to supply us parts. I would have probably approached that one a lot differently. And 2, the amount of money it takes, even though we did the first car, the Tesla Roadster, for a very, very low price by the auto industry standards, the amount of money we spent to put that car on the road, we thought we could do it for a lot less, and just simply that was not possible. So, yeah. I mean, in hindsight, I would have loved to have more people from the auto industry coming and working for us in the early days of Tesla. But if you cast your mind back to 2002, 2003, in those days, everybody in the world knew that electric cars were dead. There was 2 things everybody knew about electric cars in that era. 1, they're dead, and 2, they suck. This is what everybody knew about them. And so you find somebody who's an exec, like say a manufacturing guy at pick your car company, and say, come work for my little California startup company, we're making electric cars. They just laugh and hang up the phone. So somehow I would like to have brought more of those kind of people in early on, but difficult to do.
But bringing in the expertise from the industry you would have liked to do.
For sure, yeah. And we did eventually some. I mean, we partnered in the early days with Lotus to do the chassis and body work on the car. And we lucked into a time when Lotus their own business was down, and so they were laying off people. And I acquired 20 some odd engineers from Lotus, and that was kind of lucked into my first round of automotive engineers.
What's one of the lessons from in your new startup that you've incorporated from Tesla? What's like the most important one you think you're like, this time we're definitely going to do this differently?
Well, part of that has to do with people, that I'm a little more careful about the kind of people that I want to do business with. When we started Tesla, I had this idea of using these small batteries to build a battery system, and I chose that for a very pragmatic reason, that was the only kind of lithium-ion batteries that were being made in mass production around the world. And it seemed a little bit crazy to build your battery system with nearly 8,000 of these cells in each car. In hindsight, that turned out to have been a really, really good idea for a lot of reasons I didn't think about. And the 2 main reasons are safety. That if your battery is broken up into many, many small pieces, it's much, much easier to contain a fire if one of those goes bad for some reason. And the second reason is redundancy. If you build the battery system correctly, then if you lose one cell, if a cell fails for whatever reason in your car, not only is it not a big problem, it's actually not even detectable. The driver isn't even aware that one cell out of 8,000 stopped working. So it turns out to be a good idea, and I've run with that idea, and I've thought a lot more deeply about that, and in the designs that I think about now, we incorporate this concept with a lot more deliberateness.
I'm very curious to see what's going to come out of that. I know you can't talk much more about that. We do have time for about 2 more questions, so does anybody upstairs maybe as well? I'm sorry, I can't see as well upstairs if somebody's raising their hand.
All I see is glare on the light.
Otherwise down here, yeah, the bright gentleman in the middle. No, I'm kidding. Please, go ahead. Go ahead.
So the first presentation this morning was around a lot about emotional intelligence, empathy, that kind of topic. When I listen to you, I hear a lot of IQ, smarts, speed, quick, rational thinking.
He's an author and I'm an engineer, right?
So what did you think about his hypothesis about EQ versus IQ, and you promoting more IQ versus EQ?
I don't mean to promote one or the other. It's just my own approach to the world, I suppose. I mean, we engineers aren't famous for having that great emotional intelligence, I suppose. But I think that, I mean, I think it's critical to think about both together, and you have to think about the impact of the technologies we invent. And this is, again, my concern about autonomous cars, for example. So I don't want to make a lot of discussion about EQ. It's not my space. But, yeah.
I think a little bit of both is probably required for the world to really function.
I mean, let me elaborate a little bit more than that. There was a book written maybe in the 1970s called In the Absence of the Sacred by a guy named Jerry Mander. And in this book, he argues that every new technology that comes along brings with it its own inbuilt value system. And the value system of a new technology is emergent. We might not know what it is. And the people who invent the technology are by far the least likely to be able to recognize what is the value system of that technology. And I'll give you just a couple of examples. He was really strong against television. He was saying that television, the emergent value system of technology, of television, was the idea of packaging us up into these discrete audiences that could be packaged and sold to advertisers. And that led to a certain kind of journalism and led to a certain kind of programming that he thought was really bad for culture. And we all thought that the internet was going to free us from that the internet was going to allow anybody to be a journalist, and we could all finally see what the truth is by looking at the internet. In fact, the emergent technology of the internet is the exact opposite. That what we've created are information bubbles, that we each live in our own cocoon of listening and talking to people who believe as we do and not like the other guy does. So the emergent technology of the internet is very different than what we thought it would be. This is true for every technology that comes along, not just high technology, but I mean, money is a technology, and that's created a very strong feeling about how we value things. If we can't put a money value on something, well, it has no value, obviously, right? So the way we need to think about our inventions, we have to be vigilant to understand what are the emergent value systems of that technology and how they're going to impact our culture. Does that make sense?
Good. We have time for one more question.
That's a great book, by the way, if you ever want to read an interesting book.
Here you go. And the cube to you. Who has the fuzzy? There you go.
Martin, thanks very much for your thought-provoking thoughts. One thing I'm curious to learn, what did you want to become when you grow up as a child?
Well, that changed over the years, of course. But I wanted to be a computer engineer in the beginning. And this is, I graduated from high school, and I'll admit how old I am now, somewhere around 1978. And in those days, the computer technology was all new, and it seemed to me that this is where the future would be. I'm at the interesting stage now that my son is he's just finishing high school and will be going to college next year and thinking about what he wants to do as his career. And it's, if in his shoes, I would make different choices today than in those days. But what I wanted to be in those days was a computer engineer. I just thought that computers were the most advanced technology that humans had come up with so far, and I wanted to be part of that.
Perfect. Thank you very much for this insightful talk. I'm really glad. Thank you, guys. A round of applause, please, for the excellent question. Of course, to give you a little soundtrack to go with your next drive, well, maybe better not while driving, and Anastasia begged with that. Thank you very much for coming today. It was a real pleasure talking to you, and I'm sure you'll be around afterwards if people want to ask some questions right there. Thank you very much. Folks, our next speaker is going to talk about wearables. We're going to talk about how technology is changing the way we interact with the different things that we do, and how can we actually incorporate the technology on ourselves. Smart portable devices. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jonathan Wexler.